Шановні друзі, колеги, 10 година ранку, і хочу вас всіх привітати. Дякую, хто вмикає свої камери. Для нас це теж важливо. На сьогодні важлива подія. Цей захід Національне агентство України з питань державної служби якраз готувало разом із Вищою школою, Вищою школою публічного управління, і за сприяння проєкту PAR4UA. Для нас це, реально сьогодні буде подія, і такий цикл гостьових лекцій ми запроваджуємо. Все це буде мати сенс. Ось зі свого боку я хотіла сказати, що тема надзвичайно актуальна, особливо в тому контексті, що нещодавно ми отримали звіт прогресу України в межах пакета розширення 25-го року. І буквально те, що ми отримали минулого тижня, на початку листопада, те, що було оприлюднено Європейською комісією, особливо ті, хто безпосередньо дотичні до переговорного процесу, зокрема, я можу казати зі свого боку, це настільки важливі, чутливі теми, на що звертає увагу Європейська комісія. У нас є з вами пакет дорожня карта, у нас є плани, індикатори Ukraine Facility і так далі. Тобто для нас, як для державних службовців, публічних службовців, хочу звернути увагу, що Європейська комісія підвищила оцінку реформ в першому кластері основи процесу вступу до Європейського Союзу. Зокрема, вони позитивно відзначили прогрес в сфері публічного управління і фінансового контролю. Я би хотіла окремо зазначити, що рух до Європейського Союзу, в першу чергу, це такі системні реформи. Це ринкова, конкурентноспроможна економіка, це ефективні політики, що впроваджені на основі європейських стандартів. Процес вступу до Європейського Союзу для нас є таким собі каталізатором значних економічних і політичних реформ. Звісно, що для розвитку спроможності системи державного управління тут важливо забезпечувати реалізацію такої всеохоплюючої політики європейської інтеграції, і нам необхідно сформувати нову генерацію публічних службовців, оскільки ми всі усвідомлюємо, що я не говорю зараз про нове покоління. Нова генерація, нам потрібно по-інакшому дещо починати мислити, думати, звісно, спираючись на європейські політики. Оскільки з новим мисленням ми зможемо забезпечити ефективну державну євроінтеграційну політику, і, відповідно, гідно представляти Україну на переговорах в інституціях Європейського Союзу разом із експертами держав-членів Європейського Союзу, і, звісно, формувати майбутні політики. Що стосується нас, то я скажу, що Національне агентство для нас особисто, європейська інтеграція і міжнародна співпраця – це такий стратегічний пріоритет. І у нас є дуже чітка мета – це інтегрувати найкращі європейські практики в нашу систему професійного розвитку, залучити експертизу іноземних фахівців і реалізувати такі спільні ініціативи. Напевно, ви побачили, що протягом останніх 2 років Вищою школою публічного управління було здійснено низку заходів щодо підвищення кваліфікації публічних службовців в сфері європейської і євроатлантичної інтеграції. Я отримую на постійній основі статистику щодо кількості проходження, і відповідно з боку публічних службовців таких навчальних програм. І скажу, що з боку Вищої школи було розроблено 66 програм підвищення кваліфікації і було сертифіковано 11 200 публічних службовців за ключовими темами. Насправді ми навчаємо основам секторального законодавства Європейського Союзу, стандартам Європейського Союзу у відповідній сфері політики, і відповідно заходам адаптації законодавства, переговорного процесу, в тому числі фундаментальним європейським цінностям. І завдяки таким навчанням публічні службовці отримують таку глибоку практичну експертизу. Для організації такого навчання, звісно, що нам критично важлива співпраця із провідними європейськими школами публічного управління. І, звісно, що нам є чим пишатися. Ми пишаємося нашими партнерствами з такими європейськими освітніми інституціями, як Цюрихський інститут глобальних стратегій, Європейський інститут університету в місті Цюрих, це і Фінський інститут публічного управління, і коледж Європи в Наталіні, і в тому числі наші партнери з Французького національного інституту державної служби, теж плідна кооперація, співпраця із Гаагською академією місцевого управління. Я би хотіла окремо виділити і співпрацю із Латвійською школою публічного управління, в тому числі з Хорватською школою. Тобто в контексті передачі знань і, скажу більше, вони запозичують наші знання, оскільки зараз і школа демонструє певні здобутки, тому що ми навчаємо тому, що Європа ще не знає, не пізнала, але до чого хоче готуватися. Тобто, скажу, що таке наше партнерство, насправді це не лише підписані меморандуми, а це такий постійний живий діалог, обмін досвідом, що, власне, підтверджується з боку наших європейських колег в заходах НАЦ. Ви можете в цьому пересвідчитися самі. І ми на цьому не зупиняємося. Скажу, що ми і надалі будемо розширювати співпрацю із європейськими школами публічного управління. Але ж, повертаючись до нашого заходу, я хочу наголосити, що це лише одна із серій запланованих нами зустрічей. Ми будемо в наступному році продовжувати проводити такі гостьові лекції і обміни досвідом із представниками європейських шкіл публічного управління. Тому нам важливий прямий діалог із європейськими експертами, адже це дає нам змогу звірити годинники, зрозуміти сучасні тенденції і уникнути помилок на нашому шляху до ЄС, свого роду такі запобіжники. І зараз в цій вступній промові, напевно, мені є сенс просто висловити слова подяки нашим партнерам. Цей захід став можливим завдяки підтримці проєкту PAR4UA, посилення реформи державного управління в Україні для інтеграції в ЄС. Ми його реалізуємо разом із PGA, Professional Government Association, і Центром публічної політики Провідус за підтримки Міністерства закордонних справ Латвійської Республіки. Окей. На цьому я хочу зупинитися. And now let me continue in English. We move directly to the presentation by one of the leading European experts. It is my pleasure to introduce our speaker, Fabrіціо Тассінарі, a political scientist, founder and executive director of the School of Transnational Governance at the European University Institute in Italy. Fabrіціо Тассінарі possesses deep expertise in foreign policy, EU enlargement policy, European integrating, and the interaction between the EU and its neighboring countries. His works are published in the most influential European outlets, and his opinion is considered one of the key voices in discussions about the future of the European Union. The title of the first lecture is The External Incentives Model, a basis of understanding and implementing the EU enlargement process. We will discuss how exactly the European Union uses its instruments to encourage candidate countries to implement complex reform. In other words, we will hear not only theoretical insights, but also practical conclusions on how this external influence works, illustrated by real-life cases. Mr. Tassінарі, thank you for finding the time to be with us today, and the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Natalia. Can you hear me? Very good.
Yes, I can.
All right. So let me say good morning, first of all, from Florence, Italy. You have said enough about myself, so I'm not going to repeat it. When I was discussing this lecture with Julia, one of your collaborators, I thought I would actually do a round of introduction, but do I understand correctly that there are about 300 people in the room? Is that correct?
Yes, correct.
Okay, so we're not going to do a round of introductions. It's too many. It's brilliant. I'm actually very, and I told this to your collaborator, and I'm going to tell this to you all. When I received this invitation and I checked my calendar, I replied within 7 minutes because I am extremely keen to share whatever knowledge I have to offer on this subject with Ukrainian practitioners and civil servants. I feel very strongly about your current plight, but also and equally strongly about your future. And I hope I will be able to repeat this a couple of times in different ways as we go along, but I cannot stress it enough. I feel very strongly about it, which is why I'm extremely glad. Now, with online lectures, it's not the same as with in-person lecture, which means that sometimes I'm able to see your faces better, your body language, and you know, it's easier to interact. But I think we would not be able to do a lecture for 300 people in person like this. So we have to make the best of both worlds. And I would like to suggest the following. I will give my presentation now. I think I will do 2 sections. Is that correct, Natalia? We'll do one first section now, and then a second one in the second hour, right? So let's start now with the first, which is what you said. I will present you a model, which is called the external incentive model, and applied to the case of EU enlargement implementation, particularly with regards to Ukraine. I will speak, I think, also because you have spoken, well, I will speak for maybe about half an hour, 40 minutes, because I would really like to leave questions for you afterwards. Since it's a lot of you, I probably suggest, well, if you have burning, clarifying questions that you don't understand what I'm saying, please raise your hand even while I'm speaking, and I can clarify. But otherwise, again, I would probably prefer to finish the presentation for half an hour and then we have questions. Otherwise, it becomes a little bit too fragmented, I fear. So for this lecture, unlike the second one, I will have some slides to share. And I can also share this after with you so that you can all have them afterwards. And I'm going to present the model and its application. So let me see how to do this. Share. Open system settings. This is a little bit before. Okay, so let me start. And apologies again for this technical misunderstanding. The external incentive model is not a theoretical model, it's a practical model. It's a model that is intended to give you a mindset and a framework to understand how the European institutions, and particularly the European Commission, operates when deciding and when negotiating enlargement and accession. As you know, the process is extremely complex, and you have already in your respective fields and areas been maybe acquainted with some aspects of it. But the external incentive model is about the general procedure, how the European Commission thinks when it approaches a candidate country like Ukraine. Julia, when you're ready to share, I will be
Yes.
ready to show you.
Yeah, just a second. I already opened this one just to...
I can tell you in the meantime that
Yes.
this model has been developed at the European University Institute in Florence already in 2004. And that was the time, as you remember, when the enlargement concerned Central European countries like Poland, Lithuania, you know, the Big Bang enlargement of the 10 European countries. And the model was very useful, but I can also tell you very, very candidly that it had to be revised. It had to be revised because there were some aspects of it that did not work after the enlargement. This is to say that some countries, especially countries like Hungary, for example, ended up making decisions that, in a sense, contravened this model. So, Julia, if we can go down to the first slide with index a little bit.
Can you see the slides now?
You see the slides, yes. I think we can all see the slides.
Okay, so yes, can you see them?
I see the first.
Just a second, let me try one more time. Yes.
Very good. So let's go under the index, because I've told you already the gist. So please bear with me for 1 minute, because this is possibly the most important slides and explains you the logic of it. So I hope that you can bear with me, and again, apologies for the distractions before. So when the EU approaches a candidate country, any candidate country, but of course, here we're talking about your country, Ukraine, there are two schools of thought, two ways of doing this. And they are not one against the other. They work together in parallel. The first is what we might call socialization. What does socialization mean? Is that you, as civil servants, but also simply as citizens, get to know European citizens. You get to know how European Union citizens and institutions operate, how they think, how they manage crisis. And in the socialization part, the most important element is people-to-people contact. Of course, in the current situation you're in now, it is not very easy to do this, because what you would do in a normal situation is that you would go to a member state and observe how they work, how they do certain things. But if I can give you another example that I'm sure you are familiar with, but that I cannot stress how important it has been for Europeans, it's the Erasmus program. The Erasmus program, as you know, is mostly about education. But I can say, as part of a European education institution, that it has been overwhelmingly about socializing European citizens and getting them to think in the same way and to somehow understand each other at that level. So I think this socialization part, if you like, is also what we are doing here today. I'm trying to tell you how the European institutions think, and I will then, you know, really hope that you have questions and doubts and comments, and by having this exchange, we become closer to each other. So that is the first step. The second one, which is what we really discussed today, is the conditionality mechanism. This is at the heart of the external incentive model. And you will realize very quickly that it is a very common and intuitive way of thinking. If I usually tell my students, if any of you is a parent, if you have kids, the external incentive model is something that you use with your kids. And it is a way to place conditions in a way that they are achievable and that you know, you can negotiate. So the conditionality mechanism works like this. Conditions from the part of the European Union have to be strict and they have to be very rigorous. First point. Second point, the incentives for a country to meet those conditions have to be high. And in the case of Ukraine, the incentive is very clear and very high, is to become a member of the European Union. So you have very strict conditions, but you also have a very high incentive, because when you meet the condition, you will become a member. Therefore, the compliance of those conditions is justifiable, because, bear with me, often the problem with EU accession is that the demands are so complex and so high that at some point citizens don't understand them anymore. Citizens feel, why are we doing this for? Why is this going on? And why do we have to do it? So it's very important that the incentives from the part of the EU, which is to say money, which is to say the membership perspective, which is to say visa-free travel, these things have to be very clear, okay? Let's move to the next slide, Julia. Thank you. So, based on this very simple mechanism, conditions, incentives, these are the 4 criteria by which the EU measures to what extent enlargement is going forward and is advancing. The first is determinacy of the conditions. And the key question that really I hope all of you will really write down and somehow remember when you will hopefully very soon meet European negotiators and will start negotiating in your respective fields different parts of the enlargement. And the question is the European Union and the European Commission clear enough about what it wants from you? So that is the first question. Clarity, determinacy of the conditions. Second criteria, speed and size of the rewards. If the European Union asks you to do something, what you really need to measure it is how quickly this is advancing and how quickly this is making you closer to become a member of the EU. Because I will be very frank, I'm not a European Union official, so I can speak freely. The problem often is that these conditions are not quick enough. The demands are high, but the progress is very slow. So you need to really monitor the speed. Third criterion, is the EU credible? Is the EU credible when it tells you things? As you can hear from me, I am not giving you the neutral view that whatever the EU says is right and good. Sometimes there are double standards. Sometimes there are things that the EU asks of one country and it doesn't ask of other countries. And it is important that the EU is always reliable towards you. And finally, this you will recognize it very clearly, there are what are known as veto players. Veto players are basically countries both inside the European Union and outside the European Union that are against your membership in the EU. So they can put a veto and they can say, we don't want Ukraine to become a member of the EU. As you know, in the European Union, the decision to become a member has to be taken by unanimity. So all the members have to vote. So if there is one country that says no, the whole process is stuck. And I am afraid that in the case of Ukraine, at the moment, and we can discuss this later, I'm happy to take questions on this because it's very political, but the country that at the moment would put a veto is Hungary. Hungary at the moment, in every council formation of the EU, has put objections about how much it will cost the European Union to include Ukraine, what are the risks, what are the dangers. And this in the model would be called a veto player, because they can just put a veto and say, we don't want Ukraine to become a member. Mind you, because this will happen to you later on, there might be veto players also inside Ukraine. There might be parties or political movements or politicians that at some point in the future, they might say, sorry, this is taking too long. This is not good enough. This is not worth the money of the taxpayers, so we don't do it. So I hope also this is clear enough, because they are very specific criteria. Clarity, determinacy of the condition, speed of the conditions, credibility of the conditions, and veto players. I hope this helps. We can move on to the next criterion, the next slide, Julia. Thank you. I want to also make you aware that, and this is really part of the problem, that even if the European Union and Commission tells, and I think correctly, that they are very strict and very rigorous about how to implement the enlargement, there is some caveats and some words in the legislation that give the EU a lot of room for maneuver. It gives the EU space to go back and say, well, we can change our mind. And I quote here a council conclusion from, it's very old, it's from 1993, so it's from when the first enlargement from Eastern Europe, in Central Europe was decided. But it gives you a sense, because it says the union capacity to absorb new member has to be an important consideration. Now, if you think about it, the other criteria are very clear. A country has to be a democracy. Ukraine has to be a democracy. It has to be a market economy. It has to fulfill the acquis. So all of these are very clear. But then the European Union says, well, there is also another criteria, which is, are we as an EU able to absorb new members? I mean, this is not very clear at all, because what does it mean to be able to absorb new member? Is it because a country is too large? Is it because a country is too poor? Is it because a country is too dangerous? There's no specification. And again, this kind of wiggle room will give countries that have bad intentions the possibility to come back and say, well, we have a problem. We cannot take such a big country now, so we need to reflect. So again, I'm giving you a reality check that the process will be long, and there will be issues that you will need to tackle very clearly. Let's go to the next slide, Julia. Thank you. And this is another very important table, and I hope it's big enough for you to see it, because what I did here was to go through all of the countries that joined the EU in the last round. So, you know, Poland, the Czech Republic, Hungary, the Baltic states. and the countries that before Ukraine have been in line to become a member, like the Balkan countries, like Serbia, like Bosnia, Albania. Now, what does this table tell you? It tells you that on all of those criteria that I indicated before, on all of them, the EU is very effective before a country becomes a member of the EU. So in this period, when you guys are negotiating accession, the EU is very effective because it can ask you to do things and you will do them because you want to become a member. Very simple. But the problem is that the EU has learned, and this is the second line and the third line, that after a country becomes a member, the EU has very little leverage. I give you a very concrete example. A country like Hungary today is very openly saying that they don't agree with a lot of things that the EU is doing. In fact, the Prime Minister of Hungary even says that Hungary doesn't need to be a democracy anymore. They call themselves an illiberal democracy. Now, when something like that happens and a country is already inside the EU has very little leverage with this country. It has, what can the EU do? It can kick them out again. It can say, okay, you know what? You're not anymore a member of the EU, out of the club. But you see, that would be also admitting failure. There would be a way of saying, what we have tried to do so far, it didn't work. So they will avoid to do that, but it's still a problem. Secondly, and I need you to be very mindful about this, the countries in the Balkans, Serbia, Albania, Montenegro, North Macedonia, Bosnia and Herzegovina, they have been waiting to become members for 20 years. They are now into the 20 years. Now, in my experience, as Natalia said at the beginning, I have been working on these issues for many years. In my experience, this will not be the case of Ukraine. There is a lot of political push for Ukraine to become a member of the EU. And as you know, this has also, and this is going to be my second lecture in the second hour, the political push is separate from the accession negotiation. The accession negotiation should be very technical. The political discussion is not part of this. But it's clear that the Balkan countries so far have not had a political incentive, or rather, they didn't have many friends in the EU, to be perfectly honest with you. So the Balkan countries have been stuck for 20 years. Now, this, as I said, hopefully will not happen with you. But what could happen is that the more time goes on, the more you will lose as a country, as a government, and as population, trust in the process. You will begin to doubt if you will ever become members of the EU. And that, in turn, will make the accession slower, because simply you will say, we are not going to accept this. And this is especially the case if the EU, and this might happen, and I will give you a concrete example in the case of Ukraine, if the EU will begin to put new conditions, if the EU will begin to say there are additional conditions that we didn't agree before, but that you need to agree and meet in order to become a member. Let me give you an example. In the case of the former Yugoslavia, they had, so again, Bosnia, Serbia, all of those countries, they had all of the criteria of the countries in Central Europe, the same. But then on top of that, they had other criteria. And the other criteria was, in the case of the Balkan countries, to, as they say, collaborate with the criminal tribunal for war criminals in the former Yugoslavia. Now, you can say, and I think, you know, if you are a citizen, knowing that war crimes were perpetrated, you will say, okay, it makes sense that a country that is hiding war criminals has to be accountable for that. But it is not fair to say, this is a new criterion, and if you don't do that, you will never become a member. So this is one example. In relation to Ukraine, and I think, you know, in my conversations in Brussels and in Paris and in Berlin, I try to stress this a lot. A criterion would be that a country cannot become a member if it does not have territorial integrity. Now, this cannot possibly be a criterion for Ukraine because, as you know, there is a problem with that right now. This is why there is a war. Exactly the reason why there is a war. So it has to be made crystal clear from the beginning that territorial integrity cannot be a criterion for the membership of Ukraine. It has to go on, irrespective of that. And of course, I mean, as a supporter of Ukraine, I really hope and trust that the territorial integrity of Ukraine will be established again in full when this war is finished. I mean, this is my hope and belief and strong belief. But what I'm saying to you right now is that in the moment we are now, you should not, the EU cannot make that a new condition. So this is what I'm telling you. Now, let's move, Julia, to the very last slide, because I will cut it a bit short because I would like to really have a discussion with you. What I do, and I will send you all these slides, but what I do in the other slides is that I go through each of the criteria and show why the EU has been credible or not credible, the rewards are fast or not fast. But what I would like us to reflect on, and I put these as questions to you, because I would like to have 10 minutes in the end for questions, is what I'm telling you, how does it relate to Ukraine? I would like if you have any comments or questions about this model in relation to Ukraine. So the question is, number one, the rewards. Is the EU clear to Ukraine about the end game, about what the end result will be? In your case, if I can say very honestly, I think the EU is very clear. The EU wants Ukraine in the EU. That for me is very clear. Second point, is the EU clear about what it wants done in order for you to become a member? Question mark. Yes and no. I think there are things still that need to be ironed out and clarified. Third question, is the EU credible? I would really like to hear from you here. And again, there is no right or wrong answer. It's just an opinion. I would like to hear your candid opinion. Is the EU credible in Ukraine when it says Ukraine will become a member of the EU? I'm really curious, honestly. The second last question is enlargement too much for Ukraine? Are you asked too many things to do? Yes or no? I would also like your honest opinion. Is this something that Ukraine is able, and the population of Ukraine, not only the government, also the population, is it willing to do this? Or is it the cost too high? I would really like to hear this, because I think in Ukraine the answer might be yes, but the more time goes on, the more countries lose speed and lose encouragement. And finally, very finally, and I hope this will not ever be a case for Ukraine, are there alternatives to EU enlargement? Can the EU offer something else that is not enlargement? My personal answer, my personal wish is no. I think the EU has to offer enlargement and stick with it. Anything else is, I'm afraid, very, very candidly, part of the reason why we are in this problem now. Remember, in 2014, 2015, the EU offered a free trade agreement to Ukraine, and that was the reason why Euromaidan happened. You remember this. So I think the EU now has to be very clear. Enlargement has to be the only option. I think, because we started a little late, but I want to be able to give you the opportunity to ask questions or to make comments. So I kept it to half an hour. I hope it was interesting, this first part, but please, maybe we can take down the slides now and open for questions.
First of all, Mr. Fabrizio, it's very, very interesting. Thank you. Just a moment. I would like just a moment, the original session was, yes. Yes? Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Oh, thanks. I would like to say that your presentation, very insightful and comprehensive analysis. Thank you. It was extremely valuable. But we also have a few questions from us, from our audience. But your questions maybe more interesting. So, and your questions very difficult. Very difficult, yes. But we have on hand Yulia Yurchenko. Yulia Yurchenko, what do you think and what your opinion about these maybe all issues, all questions? Your answer.
First of all, Mr. Fabrizio, thank you so much for your presentation. Thank you, Ms. Natalia, for these questions. For this question that you give us, group discussion. Interesting thing about first one, costs. I think that for both sides, enlargement involves cost, like financial, political, institutional, and so on. And yet for the European Union, integration Ukraine is an investment in long-term security and stability. And for Ukraine, the costs are already enormous because of the war. But I think that EU membership remains the most powerful incentive for the reform and reconstruction. Yes. Maybe it's mistaken opinion, but really a lot of problems, especially in the costs, because of the war condition.
Yes. Very good point, Julia. Can I ask where you work? Because I see an acronym, NAUX, but I'm curious.
It's National Agency of Ukraine on Civil Service. I'm a colleague.
Nice. Very nice. Thank you very much. Listen, thank you for this question about the reconstruction, and it's good that you brought it up. Let me say two things here. First, the European Union is an organization that usually works in a very gradual way, in a very, step-by-step way. But then when there is a crisis, all of a sudden speed comes up. So if we take for one moment aside the case of Ukraine, you remember when there was the COVID pandemic, then in the time span of 4 months, the EU agreed to put a fund of, I believe, 850 billion euros simply to do the recovery of the pandemic. I will tell you very candidly, and I'm also willing to open this particular side of the story. When you do such a big funding, there are always concerns about transparency, about corruption, and this is also in Europe, okay? I'm Italian, so I know about corruption. But in the case of Ukraine, I expect that when the costs will begin to amount for the reconstruction, and of course, I really hope that the reconstruction can start as soon as possible. I mean, this is really my greatest wish as a European citizen for you. There will be funds that the EU will be able to come up with. And this is because of the political will that has been, again, for the past 3 years, I really do think the European Union has stepped up on Ukraine. And especially now that, I'll talk about this in the second hour, but especially now that the Americans are not stepping up as they used to, I think the Europeans will step up. And there is the whole issue, as you will remember or know, of the frozen assets that the EU confiscated from Russia, including currency assets and frozen reserves. So there has been and continues to be a big discussion about using those funds for the reconstruction of Ukraine. Again, that would be legally very important to get it right, because you appreciate that it would be the first time that this is done, but it opens a door for doing it in any other case. So, you know, say that there is in the future another war in another country that is unjust and unfair, not like in your case, then they would be able to say, oh, but you see, the EU took the frozen assets of Russia, so now we can do the same with the frozen assets of any country. So we need to do it very clearly, legally. But apart from that, I think that would be a very good starting point to pay for the reconstruction.
Yeah. Thanks a lot. And I think that we come to your last question, as you said about some help of US and European Union, but realistically, it's my opinion, I'm a fan of Euro integration, but realistically, there are no alternatives. Like other formats like the European Political Community or Association Agreement cannot replace full membership. For Ukraine, especially now, only European Union accession guarantees a stable, maybe democratic and secure future with the European integrity. And it's also like opinion, but realistically, we should understand it.
Yes, you know, I agree with you 100%. You know, this slogan that Greta Thunberg used about climate change, she said, there is no plan B, right? Or there is no planet B, she said. Well, there is no planet B for Ukraine. It has to be enlargement. It can only be enlargement. And again, I can say this as a friend of Ukraine, but the reality is also that any other option is not a very serious option. Because, again, let's go into the details of this. When Ukraine was offered the free trade agreement in 2014, 2015. That is a nice offer, but it's not enough. It's not about people so much as it is about markets. And it does not send the sufficiently strong political signal that Europe wants Ukraine in. And that was the signal that Russia understood back in 2014, 2015. We come back to this later. I know it's a very difficult subject and it's a very sensitive subject, but enlargement is about also sending a symbolic signal. So for me, this is very important. And I will also say, because again, as civil servants, you have to remember this. enlargement will be about technicalities. It can become a very technical process. Sometimes I compare it to a surgeon doing an operation in a hospital. But it is also about people. It is also about human beings. And you have to always keep in mind that the Ukrainian population is behind you when there is such a process going on. Therefore, things like free travel of people is so important, so important. And I can say with confidence, but also with a hand in my heart, Ukrainians in Europe integrate very, very well. I just passed by before a group of them that are living here in Florence. They integrate very, very well, and that is very reassuring. So,
Thank you for your answers. We are doing our best from our side.
good luck, Valentina. Cannot hear you, Valentina. No. Either maybe you can type.
Мікрофон. Валентина, мікрофон. No?
Maybe you can type your question. Maybe it's easier.
Окей, Валентина, спробуйте ще раз. Окей? I would like to ask you, what are the advantages for the EU itself when new member states join?
That is a difficult question for me.
Yes.
Because of course I have been always in favor of enlargement as a researcher and as a public official, but I know that, as you know, there are many people that are not in favor of enlargement in the EU. So what does the EU get out of this? What does the EU gain from this? First of all, you have to remember that the EU's population, economy is shrinking. We are not getting bigger in the world. I mean, we can say that the internal market of the EU is 450 million citizens, which it is. But 450 million citizens, that is 1/3 of China, 1/3 of India. Okay, so I can talk about that later. So for us to get new members is really about being open to a world that is changing and that requires us to be open if we want to be able to compete. There are many countries, many people that think that this is not important. They will say it's more important we keep what we have inside. I'm happy to discuss that option as well, but I am in favor because we need to be able to be competitive in the world. I can see one question in the chat, and then of course, Valentina, maybe now it works. Do you want to try again?
Yes, can you hear me now?
Yes, I can.
Oh, great. First of all, Mr. Tassінарі, thank you so much for your insightful presentation. We got a lot of valuable information and to think about. And if talk about your questions, I would like to say from my side that I'm completely sure that Ukraine should be a member of the European Union because we are already a part of European family. So I completely believe in it.
I agree with you.
Yeah. And my question is the next. As we know, public servants play an important role in providing of Ukraine's EU implementation policy. So in your opinion, maybe you can tell me, for example, what 5 competencies public servants need to effectively implement European integration policy, from your opinion?
Yes. So I will be very, because I've said it a couple of times, but I really mean it, because I want to help as much as possible. I will also be very clear, and maybe some things that are difficult to hear, but I will say them. I think above anything else, Ukrainian civil servants have to try try to be autonomous from political power. Okay? This is not an easy thing to do. Again, I'm from Italy. In Italy, politicians have a big role in the way the public administration is organized. And I am not saying that politicians are right or wrong, good or bad. I am just saying that politicians have as a priority the one to win elections and to then present political views. That is not the job of civil servants. The job of civil servants is to remain as much as possible insulated from political power. Okay? So I say this, I've written my second book on this. You can find it online, I think even. It's called The Pursuit of Governance. It's about what really is with good governance. And good governance, I've lived and worked for the Danish government for many years. So in Scandinavia. Scandinavia is well known for good governance, right? And what I have learned there, working for a Nordic government as an Italian, so as a foreigner, was that civil servants are autonomous from political power. Believe me, as an Italian, this was astonishing, because you would see a senior civil servant, maybe, you know, the Director General of the Ministry of Interior, I don't know, going to the minister, okay, and telling the minister, I know you won the election, I know you promised this, but minister, this cannot be done. So I'm telling you what can be done. So I use some time to tell you this because Italy and many other European countries are not there yet even. We don't do that even. It's difficult. But if you want to keep the speed of EU accession as civil servants, that's the best thing you can aim for. So imagine you are in a situation where the European Commission asks you to do something, asks you to implement some regulation, and then your minister says, no, we cannot do this. No, I would rather give money to pensionists. I don't know, something like that. I think the moment in which your top civil servant, your head of, I don't know what they're called in Ukraine, but the Secretary General, or the moment that he or she can go to the minister and tell the minister, listen, I understand you have these priorities, but we need to do this in order to get into the EU. So that is the key conversation, I think, as a civil servant, that at some point you will have to have. I hope it explains. It's not an easy one, but it's...
Thank you.
Russia's aggressive war against Ukraine has fundamentally changed the security landscape of Europe, placing the European Union's enlargement policy in a new geopolitical and strategic context. The war has highlighted the urgent need to strengthen security and stability across the continent. Particularly vulnerable are countries such as Ukraine, Moldova and Georgia, as well as the Western Balkans. In response, EU enlargement has become a critically important tool for supporting the sovereignty of these nations, strengthening democratic governance, and deepening political and economic ties. We have asked Mr. Tassінарі to share his expertise on another highly relevant issue that logically follows from our previous discussion. So we now move to the second lecture title, the geopolitics of EU enlargement, challenges and contradictions for future accession. This topic fits perfectly into the current context. Mr. Tassінарі, As an expert in international security and foreign policy, will shed light on why enlargement today serves as one of the EU's key geopolitical instruments. Mr. Tassínarì, the floor is yours for the second part of the guest lecture.
Thank you very much, Ms. Natalia. I will start straight away. As before, I will speak for about half an hour, maybe a little less, because then there is always good time for questions. I enjoyed the questions before, and I will also maybe try to answer some of those that have been made in the chat and that they were not answered before the break, specifically the one from Hannah about what happens if Ukraine meets all the criteria, but Hungary vetoes the EU accession. I will answer to that later. I'm happy to answer it, in fact. Now, about the topic on the geopolitical front, the thing you need to keep in mind here is that enlargement was never really a geopolitical instrument. It was a technical instrument to ensure accession. But since the war in Ukraine, it has become a geopolitical instrument. Now, what does this mean? What does it mean? I mean, it means that, and I don't have slides for this, it's more a conversation, so I would hope that we can open it up for questions, because some of this, you see, you experience some things in your the past 3+ years that I think are just as valuable as anything I might be able to tell you. So let me say, geopolitics in a principal definition is about power and influence over a certain space. This is what geopolitics means. This is the definition of geopolitics. However, in the way geopolitics is used as an instrument, doesn't mean only that. It means much more than that. It means that power can be, it means three things in my opinion. First, that power can be applied in a very fast way. You remember, I'm sure you remember, that the Russian government said that they would occupy Ukraine in 3 days. This was what they said at the beginning. It didn't work, and thank God for that. But what I'm trying to explain you is that a geopolitical power is able to act fast, okay? And that is because there is a very clear chain of command. I mean, there is a president that instructs ministries, and then power is following from that. The European Union doesn't work that way. The European Union doesn't, yes, it has a president, but it doesn't have a single government. And all of the decisions that have to do with geopolitics are taken by consensus by all of the member states. So by definition, the EU cannot be a geopolitical power in that sense because it is slow, and every decision is slow. I will say, however, and this gives you a sense of how important Ukraine has been for the EU, that the decision about saying that Ukraine would become a candidate country for accession was extremely fast by the European standards. So this tells you two things. The first is that Ukraine really matters a lot to us. And the second thing is that when we want, we can act fast. So the first thing is about speed. The second thing is about that enlargement and in general geopolitics is a zero-sum game. Enlargement is about making a country part of one block, of one club. And if that happens, then there is somebody else that will feel they are losing. It's not a win-win. I would think enlargement should be a win-win, because if you think about it, that was the logic of the free trade agreement back in 2014, 2015, meaning, look, we have a free trade agreement, but Russia is not necessarily going to lose from this. There is nothing in it for Russia, so why do they care? But Russia perceives enlargement, not so much EU enlargement, but more NATO enlargement, as you know. But here we're talking about EU enlargement as a zero-sum thing. So if Ukraine becomes a member, then Russia loses. So speed, zero-sum. And the third criteria, very important for Ukraine, crucial, is that geopolitics is a brutal power force. It is about using military power. You cannot be a geopolitical power without military power. And this, again, is a big problem for Europe. And we know this because we are trying to support you militarily, but we struggle. We're not ready for that. So clearly, I'm telling you that the EU is right in thinking that enlargement to Ukraine is geopolitical, but I'm also telling you we are not ready yet. We have some sign that we are doing the right things. For example, that we were so fast to agree that Ukraine should become a member. I think we will be also fast in making Ukraine become a member, but there are some other things that we are not good at, and the military is a really crucial point. Allow me in this part to make a little parenthesis and answer the question that was asked before, because I think it's relevant here. The question from Hannah is, what happens if Ukraine meets all the criteria, but Hungary vetoes the EU accession? Now, this is clearly about geopolitics. I mean, clearly Hungary can put all sorts of technical reasons for opposing membership of Ukraine, but this for Hungary is a geopolitical move. They are basically saying, we don't want the EU to expand. Now, let me be very blunt and honest. I think Hungary eventually will agree. And the reason is that when the EU so far has been confronted with this problem, then Hungary asked something else in return, usually more money. They usually asked to be given money to do other things. Okay? So it's a give and take. I think this is, I'm telling you this also to reassure you that whatever you hear Orban say, I think in the end it will work out. Because so far the EU is blocking money to Hungary because of the rule of law in Hungary. They're basically saying, you're not going to get all of the money that you're supposed to get because your judiciary is not independent, because your elections have problems. So they are blocking the money. Then what happens is that Hungary says, oh, Ukraine will never become a member of the EU. And then the EU says, okay, so let's talk about the money that you want. And then they make a little agreement about that, and Hungary then agrees. It's usual negotiation. This is how every international negotiation works. But this is to reassure you that I think, first of all, Orban is not going to be there forever. And second of all, there are ways to go around their veto. Okay? So that's the short answer. Now, I told you that the EU is not very ready to be geopolitical. It is becoming ready to be geopolitical. There is another area where Europe is very ready, and that it will be helpful to Ukraine. This goes back to the question that I think Julia asked before about the reconstruction. Europe, the European Union, is a geo-economic power. Geo-economic. It is not necessarily geopolitical for the reasons I told you. It is slow, we don't have a strong military, but we are a geo-economic power. Now, what does geo-economic means? Geo-economic means that we can use economic instruments to further political objectives. Use economic instruments to further political objectives. This is, for example, in the case of Ukraine, precisely about the reconstruction. I mean, our ability to, as Europeans, to lead the reconstruction of Ukraine is an instrument of geo-economic power, clearly. I will also be frank with you again, because I am a free, I'm not unlike many of you, I can speak freely because I'm a researcher, I'm an academic, I'm a scholar. So I don't have constraints. And I am concerned by how the EU has been negotiating in recent months, for example, with the Trump administration in relation to trade and tariffs. You might have seen this, right? I hoped that in the area of trade, the EU would have a lot more power than that. Because in trade, the EU is united. Ursula von der Leyen can speak on behalf of all of the member states. So I would have wished that when Trump made his threats about tariffs and about, putting tariffs, the EU would have stand firm and said, okay, then we are strong enough to fight you on this. But really we didn't. So we accepted the tariffs of Trump. And that is a little bit a countermeasure. That is not a very geo-economic way to use power. I have to be frank. However, and this I will say as well, the fact that the Americans are behaving like they are, and I'm happy to take questions about this as well, what you think the Americans' behavior is influencing also your situation now in Ukraine. I think the EU is beginning to realize that it needs to look elsewhere. It needs to say, there is not only America, there is not only China. There is a world outside of this that we can be friends with and we can be allies with. So just to give you an example, the day after Trump announced the tariffs on Europe, the Italian so not von der Leyen, but the Italian Prime Minister went to Japan and the Italian Foreign Minister went to India the next day. So this is a way to say, and this is again also for you guys, there is a world outside Europe, there is a world outside America. You can trade in Africa. There is a lot to do there with infrastructure. You have expertise, you have, there is the whole issue of food chain, the whole transfer and transport of grain, for example, which, as you well know, it has been a part of the problem during the war because of the Black Sea. You know this. But what I'm trying to tell you, looking beyond the war, because I really want you guys and hope for you guys that you will begin to see beyond this war, think of yourself as a trade country outside Europe. Okay, there is inside Europe, but beyond Europe, not only Europe. That's what I'm telling you. Okay, that's the second point. And the third point is indeed the military part. Europe will need to develop a military capability that is sufficiently strong to sustain also the defense of Ukraine in the future. This is a big problem. At the moment, to be very realistic, we Europeans cannot do it alone without American help. We know this. This is unfortunately the fact. And this is the problem when we speak about security guarantees, right? So we need to build the capabilities in Europe. And allow me to be very frank again, the way we are doing it now, I'm afraid, is not a very good way, because we are doing it basically answering what Trump asks us to do. So Trump said at the NATO summit in The Hague last summer, you need to invest 5% of your GDP in defense. And again, if you know Trump, I mean, he didn't do the calculation. He just said a number, right? He just said 5%. And so now we are agreeing to 5%. Fine, sure, because Trump told us that we have to, so we are agreeing to 5%. But that's not the way. Sorry, that's not the way that a serious, independent country should invest in their defense. The way that Europeans should defend, and this is something that Mario Draghi, the former Prime Minister of Italy, that was asked to write a report about Europe, he has said very clearly, the way we are doing defense investments now in Europe, we are doing it only because Trump asked us to do it in that way. But there's no thinking behind it. The way to do it in Europe would be to begin joint procurement of defense, which is to say each country in the EU should say what they have already and what they don't have, and then they should join forces and only buy what the other countries don't have. So according to Draghi, if we do it the way that Trump asked us to do it, we will lose 92% of the investment. 92% of whatever money we spend. And that is because we will duplicate. We will spend money on things that other countries already have. So we need to join procurement in Europe, because that is also the best way we can help Ukraine defend itself from a future aggression. I'm saying a lot of heavy things, but I trust that you will have comments as well about this. So I would welcome that as well. And again, the very last point I will make is there is geopolitics, there is geoeconomics. I don't want to invent another word, but I like to speak sometimes about geophilosophy. And geophilosophy is not theoretical, it's very simple. And it is about really, really thinking why, as a European, why we are doing the enlargement. It is not just we have to do it because Russia is aggressive. I think we have to do it because this is the best instrument that we have to expand freedom, stability, prosperity on the European continent. We cannot forget that. We Europeans are not very good at celebrating what we are good at doing. And enlargement is a good thing. So I think, Natalia, and I will close with this, you asked me before why Europeans should be doing it. Much of my work is about going around and telling Europeans, don't forget how important it is as a mission that we are doing this. And if you are a regular European that is worried about the paycheck and how to buy groceries, you will not think about that. So it is about trying to make that conversation understandable to European citizens, because it is an important achievement for the values that we are all trying to defend, and that you, especially in Ukraine, are defending for all of us. And I will stop there.
Mr. Fabrizio, thank you so much. Our sincere thanks for this exceptionally important and timely geopolitical analysis. I think your speeches on the geopolitical dimension of enlargement clearly demonstrated that Ukrainians' accession is not only about legislation, so it is also about security and the strategic choice of the entire European continent. And regrettably, we have 20 minutes and we now have just about this 20 minutes to ask Mr. Fabrizio a few additional questions. Maybe my first question. How can we counteract disinformation and Russia's manipulative influence within the European Union? What do you think?
Thank you so much for this question. It might be a long answer because I have a lot to say about this subject. If any of you have any other questions in the meantime, please raise the hand so that I can see that there are other questions, because in the meantime, I will answer this one that is a complicated question, but it's important. So let me preface it by saying that at the school here in Florence, I lead a large network of organizations all across Europe, about 130 of them that fight disinformation in Europe. It's a project funded by the European Union, but also by private companies. And we do things like fact-checking, we do things like media literacy, which is about teaching people to read the news and to distinguish the truth from the false. So I'm telling you, I feel very strongly. And the third thing we do is to protect journalists from danger and threats, because part of the disinformation is also physical. I mean, they are actually threatening people when they tell when they try to tell the truth. So I feel very strongly about this. The problem in Europe with this and with Russia, and especially in my country, I'm in Italy, and I don't know if you know this, but in Italy, the disinformation and propaganda is very strong. And as an Italian citizen, I have often asked myself, why is it like that? Why? And there are several reasons. And again, I can talk I wrote a few articles. I wrote an article in Politico about this. You can look it up. It's quite short. One reason is history. Some countries in Europe, and Italy is one of them, Germany is another one of them, they have a long history of relations with Russia. Also cultural relations. They feel close culturally. They think they understand Russian. They think they know Russian. In German, there is even a term for this, which is Russland verstehe, which is those that understand Russian. And there is still many of them. So that's one problem. The second problem is money. Russia is pouring a lot of money in different ways in feeding disinformation dynamics. The third problem, and this is really about our media landscape in Europe, we give equal weight to every view in the public debate. So basically what happens in a talk show in Italy, you will have on Ukraine, which is, luckily for you, something that happens almost every week. So there is Ukraine in Italian talk shows every week. But the talk show will have somebody telling the facts and somebody defending Russia. Always like that. And what I wrote in that article in Politico is that, friends, this is not a political campaign. You don't need to have all the voices heard. It is about the voices that are true and the voices that are not true. I can tell you last week there was a debate in primetime Italian television between an Italian politician who was very pro-Ukraine and then this American professor of economics called Jeffrey Sachs, I don't know if you know this name, who is, for reasons that I frankly don't understand, very pro-Russia. I really don't understand why, because he's actually very good for many other things, but for Russia. And so you had a debate between these two, but it's not how information should work. Information should work that you tell the facts, and then you leave the audience the possibility to reflect. That's how you actually inform and educate the population. So sorry to make this long, but it's a very difficult topic. Are there other questions?
Yes. But now, колеги, хто хоче ще задати запитання? Тому що, звісно, у мене є in our chat Ольга Ошитко. How long does it take to join the EU based on the experience? But I opened ours.
Yes. Very
Experience of other countries, and what is your forecast for Ukraine?
Very good question, Olga. Thank you for this. I'm very happy to answer this. So let me say one thing first. If the process is supposed to be rigorous and done well, you should not receive a deadline, as in you can only judge from the implementation. You can only judge by how much you have actually done. So in the best case, the EU will not give you a date, okay? And I can give you another example. When in the previous experience, because you're asking this, the other countries accessed in 2004, you maybe remember that there were two countries, that were not ready. It was Bulgaria and Romania. Does any of you remember that Bulgaria and Romania were not ready in 2004 and they entered later? Okay? Now, the European Union there made a mistake. They basically told Bulgaria and Romania, you are not ready in 2000, you're not ready now in 2004, but at the latest by 2007, you will become members of the EU. Now, if you appreciate the logic of this, if you're telling a country, don't worry, you don't enter now, but no matter what, you will become member in 2007. So what does this mean? That the country, you know, whatever it is that they didn't do, like in the case of Bulgaria and Romania, it was about corruption and independence of the judiciary. They didn't do anything about it because they just said, well, you know what? They promised us that we will be members by 2007. So why do we need to bother? We will go in anyway, which is exactly what happened. They went in anyway. So what I'm telling you is that if the EU learned its lesson, you will not get a date. If you ask me as a personal opinion, so this is not EU official line, it is my personal opinion, I think you should count on 7 to 8 years. I think it will take about 7 to 8 years. So I hope that by 2031, 2032, you are going to be a member of the European Union. Maybe we can meet again in 2032, and then we see if I was right or if I was wrong. I hope I will be right. And I know it sounds like a long time, 7 years, but again, the lesson that we learned from the Balkan countries, Serbia, etc., is that they have been waiting for 20 years, and this is not working. Because if you wait so long, the country will lose interest. I mean, the country will simply say, this is never going to happen. So, and Turkey, even more. Turkey is also a candidate country for membership in the EU, but they lost every hope that they will become members of the EU. So I think on the one hand, you will not get a date from the European Union. On the other, I think they learned that if we wait too long, Ukraine will lose interest. So we need to find a balance. And I think the balance, in my opinion, not an official view, is 7 to 8 years.
Thank you so much for your answer. And I would like to ask you my last question. Okay?
Yeah.
So in May this year, the EU presented its new strategy, the white paper of European defense, Readiness 2030 plan. In your opinion, what defines Europeans' resilience and stability? What do you think?
Yes, so I told you that the problem with the 2030 readiness plan is what I told you about procurement before. I don't know if you remember this thing that we are buying each for our own, and that is a problem. So the plan Readiness 2030 will enable us to hopefully do joint procurement of defense material. However, I want to say something that I have learned from my experience in working in Scandinavia. Now, and this unfortunately does not apply to my country, Italy, but I hope it will apply to your country, Ukraine, which is that countries like Finland, countries like Denmark, you see, just this is more for your information. My colleague here in Florence until last year was Alexander Stubb. Alexander Stubb is now the president of Finland. And so I've learned a lot about Finland in the past 4 years. And one thing that he taught me about this is that Finland, first of all, has a ready, trained population, military trained population of about 900,000 people. For, you know, they all do military training and they are ready. And this is something that, as you will appreciate, is very important also for Ukraine. And I think it will be good also for a country like mine, but I don't think it's going to happen in Italy. But anyway, so readiness is that as well. The other thing that readiness is that crisis management, crisis readiness is an all of government exercise. It's not only a military thing. It's not only a police thing. It is about economics. It is about healthcare. It is about transportation. It is about infrastructure. So what is really important is that when you hopefully go beyond the current tragic situation you're in, and I really hope that it will be very, very soon, that you will move to a whole of government crisis management organization that will make every part of your government ready to manage crisis. And of course, the fact that you have been in this tragic situation will make you instantly ready and understanding why this is important. Because we know this in Europe as well by now, we cannot take for granted peace anymore. So, yeah. So I hope this was helpful. I want to say also the slides, I can share them with Julia and then you can get them. There is no secret there. You are welcome to use them. Any other question? This is something I told Julia as well. I would love to come to Kiev also to do something like this. If you want me to, I'm happy to join you. Whatever I can do to help, I'm here.
Thank you so much. And Mr. Fabrizio, we sent you invitation in Kiev, okay, on our events. And we also, maybe our time, 11:57, okay. Okay, The time for our rich and engaging event is coming to an end. On behalf of everyone here, I would like to once again express our deep gratitude for your valuable contribution, your time, and for sharing such profound expertise with us. І, шановні колеги, наш ключовий висновок сьогоднішнього дня про те, що механізми розширення – це не лише технічні інструменти для адаптації законодавства. Напевно, це і стратегічні важелі впливу, що формують геополітичний ландшафт. Насправді для нас, для українських публічних службовців, це означає, що ми маємо бути однаково сильні і в технічній, і в стратегічній підготовці. Зі свого боку, я хочу щиро подякувати нашим партнерам проєкту PAR4UA і всім, хто зробив цю зустріч можливою. Насправді, ця гостьова лекція – це лише початок нашої освітньої серії. Ми будемо продовжувати залучати найкращих експертів, щоб максимально швидко і якісно пройти наш європейський шлях, адже європейська інтеграція – це наша спільна відповідальність, і це буде нашим спільним успіхом. Я сьогодні дякую всім вам за вашу активну участь і до зустрічі на наших наступних заходах. Щиро всім дякую, безпечного завершення дня. Дякую.